Apparently, ChatGPT and some of the other AI tools have learned about BIFF responses. And they didn't ask my permission, but if somebody puts in the AI and says, rewrite this paragraph in the BIFF format by Bill Eddy, it does it. But I would say two cautions about that. One is I don't think it does it well because it doesn't really understand. And the second is if you rely on AI to write your responses, it won't help you learn how to more automatically do these in the future.
Hi, my name's Lawrence Strauss, and welcome to the Family Disappeared podcast. Today we have the second part of our taping with Mr. Bill Eddy, who is a rock star. And I love the first part and the technology and the resources and the accessibility of everything that Bill shared. If you haven't listened to the first part, I highly suggest that you pop back to the episode before this and listen to the first part of that, because it is a continuum and it's such rich, accessible, easy information. If you're new to the community, welcome. We have a bunch of resources in the show notes, including all the stuff that Bill is sharing about. And we also have a free 12-step program if you're looking for a support group and a place to find people that are struggling with common challenges. And it's a recovery base. So it's a place to start to take a look at ourselves and how we can start being the primary intervention in our lives by working on ourselves emotionally and spiritually. And it has changed my life. We're also a 501c3 nonprofit. We can use your support. Everything we do is free and shall remain free. And we need support from the community to continue to do that if possible. And if not, that's wonderful too. If you don't have the resources, we love having you in the community. Keep coming along for the journey. And we want to hear from you. familydisappeared@gmail.com. You can always send me out an email, suggestions, who you want on the show, what you liked. Love hearing about what you liked and what was useful. And what you didn't like is super cool to hear about too. And if you comment, share, we just want to hear more from the community if there's other stuff that we can offer that we might not be offering. Again, bunch of resources in the show notes. And that is enough out of me. Let's see what Bill has to say today. You know, early on in parental alienation, there was so many things that used to upregulate my nervous system. And the text, the phone call from my ex was super, super challenging, and there was days that I just wanted them just to text me. I just wanted them to love me. I just wanted everything to be okay. So I was getting a dopamine rush of just waiting to get that text. And one of the things that I used to do is I used to sleep with my telephone next to my head, just waiting for a telephone call. And this was in the early days when the anxiety was super high. I was having some panic attacks, but I was so hooked into the family system, as we talk about some of the family system on this episode, that I was so hooked into the family system and so hooked into that negative reinforcement loop that I slept with the telephone by my head. And in that moment, it was what I wanted. I just wanted another hit. I just wanted another something. I just wanted to know that it was okay. And I also just wanted my ex to push into my nervous system or need something from me, because that's what I was used to. That's what the family system did, and what took a lot of years for me to understand is that's exactly what was happening to my kids. They weren't sleeping with a telephone next to their head, but they had this pre-programming and pre-wiring to react to the anxiety, to the fear, to the different nuances that were going on in the family system. Not the yelling, not the fights, not like that really easy to identify stuff, but all that stuff below the water, and I think the sleeping with the phone next to your head analogy is really, really powerful. If you're struggling with your child, you don't know their behavior, what's going on, why do they hate you, why are they doing this, why are they doing that, is just remember, like, they're sleeping next to a telephone. They're so hypersensitive to what the other parent is doing that even in sleep, they're hyper alert and they're waiting for the anxiety or the fear or the lashing out or whatever. And they're just trying not to die. They're just trying to live, as I was in that moment with that phone next to my head. I was trying to work with my anxiety and my fear. And that's the best that I could do at the moment. And there's a lot of humanity in that. And I see more and more humanity in my children as I do this recovery work. I just wanted to share that little bit about the phone. And with that, let's jump into see what Bill has to say today. You do not want to miss this. Some great, great information. And I love the interview. So let's go. You said something about you ordered for both parents. And I want to make this point for anyone out there that's listening. If you think the other spouse, the other partner is the problem, you need to take a closer look at yourself too, because I know that I perpetuated certain situations. And without me learning these skills, I would have made a so much bigger mess. Like, I changed the trajectory of my relationships with my kids by doing a lot of this recovery work that Bill is talking about. And it's paramount that you go out and do this work, whether or not the other parent's going to do it. It will be the best parenting you've ever done, in my opinion. And with that, you also mentioned the BIFF technique. Could you talk about that a little bit? You're calling out my questions before I ask them, which I love, Bill. Next time I won't even prepare questions.
Yeah. Well, talk about BIFF. BIFF has really surprised us, really has a life of its own. So BIFF stands for brief, informative, friendly, and firm. And this is the way to respond to hostile emails and text messages. It's designed for writing, although you can structure conversations around this as well. The idea of brief is usually don't respond a lot. Let's say you get a 2-page email saying you're a piece of dirt, you've done everything wrong, it's all your fault, and you want to respond to all that. Instead, just write a paragraph. And you can say, here's some information you may not have. Don't argue with what they've said. Just try to provide some information that may be useful. So let's say there's a school play next week, and one parent says, what time's the play? Where's the play? And the other parent responds, you're ignorant, you don't keep up to date, you should know what's going on. I shouldn't have to tell you everything. You're just so stupid, and the kids hate you, and blah, 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 blah. Well, you're tempted to respond to all that. Instead, you say, well, thanks for responding. Oh, and the person says, and the play next week is on Thursday at 2:00 in the main auditorium. And so you say, thank you for responding, and I'll see you at the play. That's all you have to say. You don't have to argue with all that stuff. And you can ask a question. You can say, I need to know what's the medicine that the doctor used last year, because I think we're going to need to get it renewed. And the other person says all of this stuff. Well, all you need to deal with is the information. And that's the thing, so that's why it's brief and informative. Provide information or ask for information. Then it's friendly. You want to shift it to a friendly tone. And people say, why should I be friendly if they've treated me like a jerk? And what I say is because it will make your life easier. If you can end this conversation, and that's the firm part, we want to end the hostile conversation. If by being a little bit friendly, you can shift the tone and end the conversation, you've saved yourself a lot of stress and a lot of time. So a BIFF response, typically a paragraph, just says, here's some information you may not have, and thank you for letting me know your concerns. Even though the person says you're a jerk and stupid and all that, you can say, thank you for letting me know your concerns. Here's some information. Have a good week, and leave it at that. And we have 4 books now on BIFF. We have a red cover. It's a generic book with workplace, divorce, neighbor disputes, all of those with 30 examples. Then we have BIFF for co-parent communication with about 30 examples. And that's our best-selling book, actually. There was a while we were selling 700 a month of that book, because it just simplifies people's lives. Now we have one, BIFF at Work, because workplace is also where there's a lot of hostile communication. And the most recent one we came out with last year is BIFF for Lawyers. What most people don't know is the absolutely worst, most hostile, disparaging emails are between lawyers. Where did you go? Why did you think you could practice law? How dare you do such and such? Have you no conscience? And lawyers, and I want to say it's a minority of lawyers, but the worst ones I've seen, the worst emails I've seen are by lawyers against each other. So anyway, so we wrote one for lawyers, and that one's selling pretty well as well. So that's the idea. It's really, really simple. If people want to learn the method for free, they can go to our website and look up an article that says how to write a BIFF response. And it's in 2 or 3 pages, teaches you how to do this. It's an extremely simple method, but it does take practice.
That's fantastic. I love it. And anything that we're talking about, if you're driving or sitting or relaxing, you want to get all this information down, we're going to put all this stuff in the show notes, all the links to anything that Bill's discussing, to his website, to some of these documents that he's talking about. So it's going to be super easy to access and go practice and see if it's a fit for you. And the question I would have, is there a part of the framework that is just like a pause? You know what I mean? Because a lot of people, these communications are super upregulating, and there's this tendency to want to respond really quickly, want to get it over with, because we're anxious too. We don't want to carry this anxiety around with us. Is there a part in that teaching is just, hey, pause, and is it even necessary to respond sometimes?
That's really the first question, is do you need to respond? But also we encourage people, if you can, wait 24 hours before you respond, or write a response but set it aside, and maybe write it in handwriting so you don't accidentally hit send. But yes, so a lot of it is about self-restraint, is holding back. Don't say everything that comes into your mind. Also, if you can, have someone else look it over. Say, do you see any problems here? And I might mention a great tip. I wish I thought of this, but a co-author on the BIFF for co-parenting, Kevin Chafin, who's a family therapist in Kansas, he was one of the co-authors. And he said, take the email you receive and cross out everything that you don't need to respond to, and then just leave. And so it might say, you're a piece of dirt, you've done everything wrong, and what time is that play next week, and where is it? And, you never think about the kids. You're totally self-centered, and you're such a jerk. And so you cross out everything except what time is the play next week and where is it? And then you respond to that just with straight information. It just lowers the temperature so much. That's, I think, a really almost fun way to, it's really fun to rewrite the incoming email as a BIFF.
I love it. And just the idea of getting rid of all that noise and just getting down to what is the real essence. And again, in the community, that so many people get these emails and the text, and then the responses go back and forth. And we kind of pour fuel on this flame because it's not going out if we participate. You know what I mean? And taking a step back, using technology like BIFF, pausing, handwriting it, having someone else read it, is paramount and super, super simple. Like there's no limit to access for any of this. And I'm just going to share a quick story and then jump into the next question. So I got sober like 19 years ago. And like a couple months into sobriety, I had this great idea to write my ex-wife this letter and everything was going to be great. And I call my sponsor and I'm like, I'm doing this. He's like, come over with the letter. So I drive over to his house and we sit down and I read him the letter. And he's like, tell you what, give me the letter. I'm going to hold on to it for tonight and come back tomorrow morning and we'll reread the letter and then decide if it's useful to send. So I'm like, I need to send it now, but I leave, I go home, I come back the next day and I sit down and I read the letter with him and I look at him and I'm go, whoa, I am completely nuts. I was picking up all those pieces. And I just want to say this one other thing out of the 12-step Al-Anon framework. There's a line in there that says detach with love. And that's kind of like what this sounds to me, is we let go of all the background noise and everything like that. And we just talk about the relevant parts. And they're not even about us when they're lashing out. In my experience, it's about their anxiety, about their fear, about their need to get rid of energy, the same way they blow it through the kids. They're trying to blow it through the email or blow it through the text to the other parent or whoever they're mad at that second. That's what my experience is.
I very much agree with that. And I would add to that, if you get, or your lawyer gets, hostile letters from the other lawyer, often it's to please the upset parent, not because they need to say it. And you go, how dare the lawyer think that way? The lawyer might not have even thought about it. I got a letter like that once, and I had to talk to the office, and they apologized that the lawyer was actually out of town, so the office just forwarded over the lawyer's signature what the client had written. And so, a lot of this is just people venting, and you just don't need to respond.
funny. I was just on a trip on a vacation and I got one of those emails from someone. And what I do is like the first line has something super antagonistic. So I just delete it. I stopped even reading them and then I deleted from my inbox or whatever like that. So I never get to read it. And at a later time, if I connect with that person in a less upregulated state, then I just say, hey, just curious what you wanted to discuss, you know? And
Yeah.
that's how I take care of myself. But maybe it's not a great idea, but it seems to work sometimes.
Well, I think self-restraint is a really big part of this. And we're dealing with people who aren't self-restrained. And so that doesn't mean we should fire back and get down in the mud back. This is a way, you mentioned like adding fuel to the flames. I like to think of a BIFF as pouring cold water on the flames. And that really seems to help.
Yeah, no, I think it's wonderful. And I love the accessibility, just like your course on teaching parents skills. Super simple, super accessible, the super simple, super accessible. And like that's what we need. We don't need these giant conversations and these giant wars and these giant other things. We just need to keep everything super simple and the family system starts to change. And for anyone out there listening, these are systemic interventions where we're changing the behavior and communication or how we show up, and that will slowly change the family system. And it most probably is the best way to resolve these conflicts versus trying to just address one issue at a time.
Yeah. Although, let me add an idea, and that is keep the conflict small. So often just addressing one issue at a time in the context of this larger understanding can be helpful. And that's where, like, BIFF is so short, like a paragraph. Don't try to address 10 issues that they've raised. Just try to address the most important issue, and maybe the next day or a couple days later address another issue that was raised. But if you can, keep the conflict small. We find that helps too. Let me add something else that is very new. That is apparently ChatGPT and some of the other AI tools have learned about BIFF responses. And they didn't ask my permission, but if somebody puts in the AI and says, rewrite this paragraph in the BIFF format by Bill Eddy, it does it. But I would say two cautions about that. One is I don't think it does it well because it doesn't really understand. And the second is if you rely on AI to write your responses, it won't help you learn how to more automatically do these in the future. And so you'll always be dependent. And frankly, a lot of lawyers rewrite their clients' emails to tone them down. And I tell them, don't do that. Teach them the BIFF method so that they can do that more on their own. Not only save time and money and the lawyer's frustration, because they're like, there you go again. We'll teach them how to do it differently. So I would say don't use AI to write your BIFF responses, even if it pretends to know what it's doing.
Yes, the technology is shifting super quickly, and that's interesting that ChatGPT and other programs now can identify both. And I think it's useful way to practice if you're making up emails or making up situations, plugging it in there, seeing what comes out, and practicing it, and to really embody it, to actually do it yourself makes a lot of sense and is really the only way through, like you're saying. I'm going to move on to a different question. In your book, Splitting, you emphasize the importance of protecting oneself while divorcing in high conflict. Can you share some of the key strategies about that?
Yeah. So and I think of this, a lot the splitting book helps people if they have a court case. I always encourage people to try to handle your case out of court, but don't do that forever if you're not making any progress, and don't do that if you're being manipulated. So it's like I did mediation for 40 years, which is part of my different points of view. And yet I'll say, go to 2 mediation sessions. And if you have no progress, stop doing that and go to court because some people are going to manipulate you. And if you're afraid to go to court, don't be afraid to go to court. You get standard orders in most cases. But also, you need to protect yourself. Often, what I call a high conflict person is a persuasive blamer. And so in court, they're going to be very blaming. And sometimes they emotionally hook the judges. And the judge goes, oh, sir, you're doing this, this, and this, when it may not even be true. So you need to protect yourself by presenting your information. And one thing I suggest is high conflict people in court communicate simply, repetitively, and emotionally. And that often can hook decision makers like an evaluator, parenting coordinator, whoever. So what you have to do is also communicate simply, repetitively, with mild emotional words, but don't act emotional, and telling the truth. So you have to protect yourself against false allegations. You have to protect yourself against emotional accusations. And I include that in the splitting book, is think of the three biggest concerns that you have and three biggest patterns of behavior that you think the court needs to know about. Maybe the person has a lot of emotional instability. Well, you need to point that out and give like the three worst examples of that. Maybe they make false statements to professionals. A lot of the cases I work with these days, and I do a lot of consultation for individuals and lawyers, and a lot of these cases, they're fighting against allegations of one form of abuse or another, and the false allegations can carry a lot of weight. People get restraining orders against them, things like that. So you want to say, this person makes false statements to professionals, give three worst examples, and maybe undermining my parenting is very common, especially in alienation cases. Now, courts really vary on whether you can use the word alienation. The courts don't use parental alienation syndrome, that's been rejected. But some courts are certainly open to hearing about alienating behaviors. And they see a pattern of alienating behaviors that may influence their decision making. I recommend talk about undermining behaviors. So the other parents undermining my parenting. They schedule events during my time. They tell the children that I don't know what I'm doing. All of these things. So the court needs to hear about these. But if you tell the court 30 things that are a problem and have a long, let's say you have a written declaration, something like that, that's just a wall of words, they don't absorb anything, but they're absorbing a high conflict person's emotions. So to absorb your concerns, you have to keep it simple, like pick the three patterns and best, strongest examples under each of those, verbally or in writing, so that this is how you protect yourself against false allegations, against emotional statements that mislead the court. The other thing I want to say that's so important is, and an issue in alienation cases and others, is you have to tell the story of what's happening from your perspective. Because what happens is if the other person is saying you're doing this, this, and this, and you defend against their story still stands. And I've seen this in court cases, many court cases, including lawyers that don't understand this, that they defend against what's being said, but they don't say what's really going on. What's really going on is, let's say she's angry because I'm divorcing her. And so she's looking for ways to punish me, and that's why she's saying X, Y, Z. Instead of saying, I never did X, I never did Y, I never did Z. Her story still stands if you defend against the items in her story, and that's where you stop. You need to start by saying, this is what's really going on, Your Honor. Because of this and this, she's saying these things. And I'm saying she, it could be he, because I don't think it's a gender issue. So you have to have your story out there, not just respond to their story. And a lot of like trial lawyers that do civil trials, a lot of experience will agree with this. But a lot of people in family court representing themselves and a lot of family court lawyers don't realize the power of a high conflict person's story about how rotten the other person is.
Thank you for touching on that and really moving away from just jumping into their emotions and stuff and protecting yourself and arguing, which is what they naturally want and are used to, is representing the story from your perspective, what's going on, and staying out of saying I'm not a bad person or I didn't step on the dog or whatever that is. I love that. And that sounds incredibly useful. And also love the idea that you're just boiling down to a couple things and you're basically mimicking and mirroring what the potentially alienating parents do by being repetitive about by what you're saying. And I can't remember what the other two things are, but you're basically staying within a framework similar to kind of like BIFF, where they're coming up with their little strategy and then you're just mirroring back the same strategy, but in a more succinct way that's so you get to be represented in the story, that you're up front and center and not just them. Can you repeat those three different things that you said it was important to package it down to?
Well, that it's simple, and that's why I say just three themes. Identify three themes in your case. And I gave an example of emotional instability, false statements, and undermining my parenting. Those are very common in these cases. So those are three themes you might use. But in terms of the structure, keep it simple and also be repetitive. So you'll say, here's another example of her undermining my parenting. So that the court hears this simple phrase over and over again and absorbs it, because if you have a wall of words, the court doesn't necessarily absorb anything, but they absorb the person making allegations against you. It's mirroring the structure of how they communicate. And they don't do it on purpose. They don't even know they're doing this. They're just highly emotional, simple, and blaming. And that's so you want to be simple, repetitive, mildly emotional words like undermining, but don't act emotional because then that you lose credibility. So simple, repetitive, and mildly emotional and true. What you have to say has to fit your headings. So if you say she's undermining your parenting, and then you say that she was 10 minutes late when you went to pick up the kids, that's not going to come through because you're exaggerating. It needs to fit. You need to say what's really going on, what your concerns really are. I think that might be the three things you're talking about.
100%. Incredibly useful. Love keeping it simple, being repetitive, making sure that you're being represented.
Let me mention in chapter 14 of the splitting book, I explain that method in depth and give an example. So people are interested in more on that. Look at chapter 14 in the book Splitting.
Wonderful, wonderful. And we are getting closer to the end of our time together. So, can you describe how your course, It's All Your Fault, addresses high conflict personalities and if that would be useful for the community?
I'm trying to think of which course this is because we have several courses through our website and through High Conflict Institute. Oh, our podcast, as we call it, It's All Your Fault. Maybe that's what you're thinking of.
Yeah, let's share a little bit about your podcast and how that could be useful for people to jump into that conversation.
Okay. And let me just say, if we have a course called It's All Your Fault, it teaches our basic skills like this because we're constantly creating new courses through our website. But our podcast is weekly. It's called It's All Your Fault. It's 30 minutes to an hour. It's Megan Hunter and myself. We co-founded High Conflict Institute. I said in 2008, 17 years ago. And we do education like this. Occasionally we have guests, but the majority of it is our kind of back and forth on understanding personality disorders and how they may be involved in high conflict cases, understanding workplace, neighbor disputes. It's everything high conflict and dealing with high conflict personalities. We've been going, I think, 3 years by now, but that's another free source of information. So people can come find out about that on our website.
That's incredible. I love again that you have those resources out there for people. 3 years of technology that is accessible and free to everyone. Jump in there. Learn a bunch of stuff. The conversations being beyond my expectations, but I've really enjoyed your demeanor, how you're able to communicate it, the simplicity of your systems, the availability and accessibility to everyone, pretty much. And I love that. And is anything that I've missed that you'd like to share that feels super important to talk about in these last couple of minutes, Bill?
Just come to our website, highconflictinstitute.com. We have a lot of free articles, probably 50 or more free articles. We also have some video training, like 1 hour on different subjects, including alienation and other subjects. We also do consultation. I do a lot of one-to-one consultation. I do 30-minute and 60-minute consultations. I do that with people and their lawyers in some cases, helping them develop strategies, understand what they're dealing with, because often a lot of family lawyers just don't really understand high conflict personalities and a lot of these subtle dynamics. A lot of new lawyers don't know much about alienation. Also, I want to say I deal with cases with domestic violence and cases with child abuse, and they all exist. And so people need to recognize that and not minimize that. I see there's some competition between the domestic violence people and alienation people that's really unnecessary. I think most people really aware of this realize this all exists and we need to understand each particular case. Anyway, constantly learning, keep your eyes open and keep your mind open and protect yourself. Be wise about what to do. So I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, Lawrence, and your educational work, because you're really on target with what you're doing.
Thank you so much for your time, Bill. And again, we're going to put all this information in the show notes. And there's so many different questions and different ideas. I have to reconnect at some time if you're open to doing another interview or doing a question and answer with folks out in the community.
Sure, glad to.
So that's it, Bill. We're done. That was great. A lot of phenomenal information. And again, I appreciate you and the work that you're doing. We need folks like you in this community doing this work and pushing the ball forward where it's simple and accessible to people, which I admire, and affordable.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a beautiful day. Hope to see you around the neighborhood somewhere. Wow, wow, wow. Bill, you knocked it out of the park. Love the information, love the accessibility, love the simplicity, and love your delivery. Like everything that you're talking about is really digestible and easy to manage and disseminate and work with. And again, everything will be in the show notes. All Bill's stuff that he's talking about, all the different things that we're offering up will be in the show notes. And we really appreciate you coming out to listen and play and sit in community today with us. That's very cool to have community. And if you're new to the community, again, welcome. Great stuff in the show notes. We are a 501c3 nonprofit. Can use any support you're willing to offer. Love to hear from you. familydisappeared@gmail.com. Please like, share, let people know the work that we're doing. We want to make it accessible to everyone worldwide and love any suggestions. And if you're looking to volunteer or have some really strong skill sets that you're willing to offer, please email. Please email me and we can use whatever help we can get. And I think that's plenty out of me. I hope you have a beautiful day. If no one's told you yet today, I love you. I hope you're loving yourself too. I think that's sometimes the part that we skip, or at least that I skip. Have a beautiful day, and I hope to see you around the neighborhood. And I keep saying so and yeah. What weird programming. Have a beautiful day.